Well, welcome back to our studies in the Gospel of Mark here at the Berean Post. My name is Dwayne, and here is the challenge. Can we read the Bible the way that the first audience heard it? Can we let it unsettle us, strip away traditions, and confront us afresh? Well, let's find out together. Today we are in Mark chapter 2, verses 1 to 12, and this really is one of the most unforgettable scenes in the gospel. A story of a paralyzed man, four desperate friends, a torn up roof, and then there's the single word from Jesus that changes everything. So come on, let's just jump right into the text. I'm going to start with verses 1. We're going to go to 12, and I'm reading from the New King James, but follow along in whatever your favorite version is. And again he entered into Capernaum after some days, and it was heard that he was in the house. Immediately many gathered together so that there was no longer room to receive them, not even near the door. And he preached the word to them. And then they came to him bringing a paralytic who was carried by four men. And when they could not come near him because of the crowd, they uncovered the roof where he was so that they had broken through. They let down the bed on which the paralytic was laying. And when Jesus saw their faith, it wasn't just his faith, but their faith. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven you." And when some of the scribes were sitting there and reasoning in their hearts, "Why does this man speak blasphemies like this? Who can forgive sins but God alone?" But immediately, there's that word again, but immediately when Jesus perceived in his spirit that they reasoned thus within themselves, he said to them, "Why do you reason about these things in your hearts? Which is it easier to say to the paralytic, 'Your sins are forgiven you,' or to say, 'Arise, take up your bed and walk'? But that you may know that the Son of Man has power on earth to forgive sins," he said to the paralytic, "I say to you, arise, take up your bed, and go to your house." And immediately he rose up, took up the bed, and went into the presence of them all, so that they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, "We never saw anything like this." Now, as you know, I always like to try to imagine the scene and not make it up, but based on the historical context and so forth, try to understand what's going on. So come and try that with me, okay? So imagine this: that the house is jam packed. That's what the text says. Heat presses from the bodies crammed shoulder to shoulder, and the air smells of sweat, smoke from oil lamps, and packed earth. Men wedge into the doorway, heads crane through the windows. Every single space is taken, and at the center sits Jesus, as he should be, steady, calm, his voice carrying over the restless crowd. And off to the side, sit the scribes. Their arms are folded, and their arms are sharp, and they're weighing every single word for error. I got to tell you this little story. I can remember going to one church where there was this guy that came who felt his ministry, his gift was the gift of discernment, and he would always sit at the back of the church, leaning up against the wall. And he told me his job was basically to, discern for any error that might be coming through in the preaching. And so I always get a picture of that guy whenever I think of the Pharisees. But let's get back to the story. So at the center sits Jesus. He's steady, he's calm. The voices carry over the restless crowd, and off to the side sit these scribes. And like I said, they're folded, they're skeptical, and they're watching for anything that they can put their finger on. And then it happens, okay? Scraping above, the dust starts to trickle down, and someone coughs a bit. They cough a little bit, and bits of mud and thatch fall into their hair, and the ceiling groans under the tugging of the friends' hands. Now these roofs, timber beams, reeds, and mud plaster were sturdy, but they were repairable, and now it's being ripped open. So light starts to pierce through the dark. The hole widens, and slowly this mat begins to descend. And now you can imagine all the eyes are like, "What in the world?" All the eyes are fixed on it. The ropes are starting to creak, and the broken body swaying helplessly until he's laid right there at the rabbi at Jesus' feet. The air holds holds its breath. Like, what's going to happen? And Jesus looks at him and says the unthinkable. Son, your sins are forgiven. Now, okay, so everybody was expecting a healing. That's why he was lowered through the roof. But Jesus goes deeper. Before touching the body, he deals with the soul. And when he says this, sons, your sins are forgiven, the scribes stiffen. Now, they're not wrong, because only God can forgive sins. The law tied forgiveness to temple, sacrifice, and priests. And Leviticus 4 says the priest shall make an atonement for him, and it shall be forgiven. But Jesus skips the temple, the priest, the sacrifice, and forgives directly. And that's why they're calling this blasphemy. And if he's just a man, then they're right. But Jesus doesn't leave his claim hanging in the air. He reads their thoughts, and he says to them, he's speaking to these Pharisees and the scribes who are thinking this man's blaspheming. So Jesus turns to him and says, which is it easier to say? Your sins are forgiven you, or to say, get up and walk? Look, anyone can say that you're forgiven. There's no proof. Like, you go to the priest, if you're a Catholic, you go to a priest, and he says, do such and such and such, and you'll be forgiven. That's easy to say. But what's the proof that you actually are forgiven? But healing, that would take visible authority. So he turns to the paralytic and he says, I say to you, arise, take up your bed, and go to your house. And immediately, not slowly after therapy, Mark says immediately he picks up the very mat that carried his shame, and he walks out in full view of them all. So the room explodes. We've never seen anything like this. So there's some theological weight here. The physical miracle proved the invisible reality. Let me say that again. The physical miracle proved the invisible reality. If Jesus commands crippled legs, then his word carries authority of God himself to forgive sins. And when he calls himself the Son of Man, he's invoking Daniel 7, the figure given everlasting dominion by the Ancient of Days. This just isn't a healer. This is heaven's authority in human flesh. So here's a question that we can kind of think about. Who are we in that room? Whenever we watch a movie or read a book, we always try to identify, or we always seem to identify with the good guy. Well, the good guy in this room is Jesus. So, but who are we in relationship to him? Are we like the scribes that fold your arms, you're skeptical, threatened when the authority of God overturns, your categories or my categories? Are we like the crowd, amazed but passive, content to watch without drawing closer? Or are we like the four friends, relentless, willing to dig through the roof or any barrier to bring someone that you love to Jesus? Or are we the paralytic, the helpless, unable to move yourself, needing both the faith of others and the voice of Jesus to raise me up? The story proves it. Jesus doesn't just heal, he forgives. And he still speaks these words today. Well, thanks for joining me for this episode 10 in our studies of the Gospel of Mark. And maybe you need to hear these words too. Son, daughter, your sins are forgiven you. You can go to Jesus and he will not turn you away. And that's the authority that he has as the Son of Man. And if this spoke to you, please share it, subscribe, and walk with me as we continue through Mark's Gospel.